Hey there, Pumpkin. Joe here from Home Studio Corner. I want to talk about the Red Light Distortion plugin that comes with Studio One Pro. I love this plugin. It is a great tool, especially when I get into a pickle and can't seem to get the sound I want using the normal EQ and compression. Now, real quickly, if you don't have Studio One or you don't have this plugin, chances are you've got a system that has some sort of overdrive or even an amp modeler, guitar amp modeler. Any of those will work for this, but I'm going to be using Red Light Distortion in this video. Real quick, what is the deal with distortion and how should we think about it in a mix? Well, obviously it's going to distort the sound, and we've heard examples of over-the-top distortion. That's not really what I'm talking about and not the way that I tend to use the Red Light Distortion plugin. Usually it's for character and tone shaping as well as an element of compression. If you watch That Pedal Show with Dan and Mick, they refer to when a guitar amp is overdriving, when you've gone from really clean to you cranked it up to the point where it's starting to overdrive. They talk about half the time they'll say, oh, it's the amp is overdriving, and half the time they'll say that amp is compressing. And that's a pretty accurate statement because what's happening with overdrive is you are getting compression. You are increasing the volume while decreasing the dynamic range. You're taking that clean waveform and you're lopping off the peaks, which in turn creates these harmonics, which causes what we hear as distortion. It's funny, for years, we were on recording to tape where nothing was ever completely clean, and the goal was to get a clean recording, and then we get to digital, and the response is, oh, that's too clean. Let's add in things to make it not clean anymore. So when I'm mixing a song, if proper channels aren't working, I'm just not getting the tone that I want, much of the time I'll reach for the Red Light Distortion at least for a couple of minutes just to see if that gives me a tone that I wasn't able to get otherwise. There are three places I like to use it a lot. I'll show those to you today. The first is on Snare Drum, and the second and third have to do with vocals. We'll get to that in a second. So here is a Snare Drum coming into a, as you can see here, a wham section of a song. Here's what that snare sounds like by itself. So that's how I mixed it, just using standard EQ compression. Got 1176, kissing it a little bit, boosting some of the lows and the upper mids to make it sound both beefy and crunchy, all that normal stuff. But let's say I couldn't get a sound that I wanted, or I tried EQ and compression and just wasn't digging it, or I just, for whatever reason, wanted to try something different. Here's where some sort of distortion plugin can come in handy. So here's that raw sound without the EQ and compression. Okay, sounds like just a very normal snare sound. This was recorded here in my studio. So let's see what happens when we add the distortion plugin. The reason I like this one is it's physically a small looking plugin, but it actually has a lot of features. The drive obviously says how much overdrive we're getting. These two low and high frequency knobs are actually low and high pass filters, and as far as I can understand it, they filter the sound before it hits the drive circuit, so you can remove some low end from going into the overdrive, which will change how that drive reacts. If there's a ton of low end, you're almost limited in the tones you can get, so you can remove some of that to give yourself more options at the drive stage. Output gain is just a fader for this plugin because it does increase the volume, so I usually keep it down here. And then the mix knob is super fun. Maybe we don't want an all distorted signal. We want it to be processed parallel, where we have some of the clean signal and some of the mixed signal that's there as well. So let's take our snare sound and let's just crank up the overdrive and see what kind of sound we can get. So that's obviously too far, but kind of until we got to that last little bit right there, everything in here was pretty usable. So right there, that feels pretty good to me. Let's listen to kind of just the before and after with and without the plugin, and listen to what just this little amount of distortion is doing to that snare drum. Now, to be fair, it's adding a lot of volume. Let me turn it up a little bit, because I don't want to be that guy who just adds volume and then everyone says, hey, bro, you just made it louder. You're not really doing anything, because that would be actually pretty accurate. Let me turn this down. So it's kind of doing a couple of things. It's doing a little bit of an EQ job where it's kind of emphasizing the upper mids a little bit. It's making the low end feel a little woofier. But it's also doing some of that compression stuff where we're hearing the background noises a little more clearly, and then the snare sound itself sounds a little squishier, as if we had added compression. It's honestly acting similar to what we heard with our compressor and EQ plugins over here. But with the distortion instead, it gives it almost just kind of a dirtier vibe, which makes sense. Now, I'm not saying you need to use distortion every time you mix a snare drum, not at all. But if you've got a snare drum that's just not giving you the tone that you want, a distortion plugin can kind of add in some more tones. Sometimes they'll be the wrong tones and it'll make it worse. That'll happen about half the time. But then half the time it might, when you pull in the distortion, it might add some difference of tone that just gives you a different vibe. The other thing you can obviously do is put this on a copy of the snare, get it really crunchy, and then blend that in with the original. Or you can do that with the mix knob here. All of those are options. But if you've never thought about putting some grit on your snare drums, it's not a new concept. I'm certainly not the first to do it. They do it in Nashville a lot, even on country records. It's kind of been known to put like the Sansamp plugin on a snare drum. Pretty much a go-to approach. If you've never tried it, try it. It's super fun. Okay, let's move on to the other situation where I tend to like to use the red light distortion. Let me fix my snare, get it back how I like it. And that is on vocals. We know what a distorted vocal sounds like, right? It's pretty obvious. Let me go find a vocal spot. We need people here who seek to understand instead of demonize, who try to see the world through someone else's eyes. It can make for a good kind of effect for a section of the song to be really affected. But honestly, that's not the way I use it too much. I use it as kind of, again, as a little bit of a compression type thing, or I'm just trying to create a cool, interesting vibe. If you ever listen to some songs where there's a rock vocal, and when the vocalist sings really loud, it almost sounds like something's distorting. And I used to think that was just a compressor, but I would try to just go nuts with compression, something like this, LA2A, to get it to make that sound, and I could never quite get it there. And then I added in just a little bit of distortion and blended that in, and suddenly there was that kind of grit that I was missing. Here it is on the chorus. No, that's not the chorus vocal. Let's put this on the chorus vocal right here. The world is not the way. So that's too much. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. So without it. The world is not the way. And then with it. The world is not the way. So you can hear that on the way. There's kind of this sort of just frequency freak out that happens. And we can go blend in the original and make it kind of have the best of both worlds. That nice, clean original vocal and then some distortion kind of underneath it. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. Now, there's going to be all sorts of artifacts that will always come with using distortion, but it can be a really cool effect to use to give yourself a little more character on a vocal. Again, it's one of those things I don't pull out all the time, but especially on aggressive vocals, it almost is like, man, that vocalist is singing like a rock guitar. I'm going to put him through some distortion, just like a rock guitar would go through some distortion. It's going to be really cool. Final place where I used red light distortion, and honestly, this is the place I use it probably the most, is on some sort of slap back delay. So on this vocal, we can hear I've got a little bit of slap delay there. The world is not the way. Turn it up so you can hear it a little more. The world is not the way. Love slapback delay. One of the things you can do to make your slapback even more interesting is just add distortion to it. So as you can see, this is my slapback delay bus, just having regular analog delay with something like 100 millisecond delay time. Yeah, 120 millisecond delay time, no repeats. That's all well and good. Sounds like this. The world is not the way. Now I'm just going to take that, after that delay plugin, I'm just going to add my red light distortion, crank it up a little bit. The world is not the way. it's supposed to be. And then to make sure that things don't get too muddy, I'm going to roll off some of the low end. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. So again, what you're hearing just there is the slapback signal, not the main signal. If we turn the vocal back on and listen to it with this delay, with the distortion, it can sound kind of cool. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. So you get the slapback delay instead of being this kind of clean, short little repeat of the vocal, which can work a lot of times. It becomes even more of a feature and it becomes this really cool part. I use it all the time, probably to a fault in my own music on the vocal, especially if it's an aggressive vocal. And I try the distortion on the vocal, but it makes it a little too unclean so that I can't hear it as clearly. This is my next step. If that doesn't work, this is something I love to do because the vocal by itself is nice and clean and up front. The world is not the way. And then the delay itself is dirty and nasty. The world is not the way. And then blended together, you get both clean and nasty. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. The change is coming. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. The change is coming. And then there's background vocals just because they're so stinking fun. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you like mixing and you want more mixing tips from me and you haven't got my 5-step mix guide, stop everything. Go to 5stepmix.com, get that for free, read it, and then go mix a song. I promise it's going to be better and you're going to love it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.